Now, I would like to quickly proceed with the third session of today's event, and it's going to be about solutions for climate change. We already touched slightly upon solutions in the first and also in the second part, but now we would like to really focus on solutions. And we will have two presentations. I would like to invite speakers to try to keep their presentations concise. Please don't exceed 15 minutes, I hope, and I'm sure you will be able to. And afterwards, there will be some time for the discussion amongst us and the audience as well. So, as first, I would like to invite Zinta Zomers. Well, Zinta is the person that was mentioned earlier, the only Latvian author that has been contributing to the IPCC, and we are very, very proud to have her here. And well, in fact, she has many credits, and among them is that she has also worked for the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in the year when Paris Agreement was adopted. So probably you have seen more than us, and we are very happy to have you here. And well, Zinta, you have the floor to talk now about mitigation solutions.
Paldies, man liels prieks.
Thank you very much. I am truly honored and happy to be with you. I was born in Canada. I was raised there, and I graduated from the Oxford University. Currently, I'm working in the United Kingdom, but here in Jelgava, I feel myself like home, as my grandfather was born near Jelgava approximately 200 years ago, and exactly 1 century before the independence of Latvia. Last week in London, I had a great opportunity to attend opera Neo-Arctic by Latvian Radio Chorus on the occasion of the centenary of Latvia. The opera showcased how humankind affected the planet, and that was a vision by the director of the opera. People were wearing masks and overalls to protect their bodies from the air pollution and planet pollution. We are celebrating the first century of independent Latvia this week, and that is an excellent opportunity for a question what future would look like for Latvia. Previous speakers emphasized challenges and problems, and I was asked to share solutions. Today, I think that solutions are possible, and everyone should play a role in implementing solutions. Roots of solutions can be found in our traditional culture and in our traditional values, as our Latvian folk song says. "Oh Lord, what a good life by the edge of a large forest. Tall trees, abundant trees, shading the sunrise." But I would like to turn back to forests and their role later on in my presentation. Currently, I will switch over to English, as I am using slides of IPCC, and they are in English.
The data that I'm presenting is from the third report or the IPCC third working group, which focuses on mitigation. Now, this report was prepared by over 235 authors with 800 reviewers. It's close to 1,500 pages and has over 10,000 references. So it's a lot of science. Now, the next slides I'll go through quickly. As was already mentioned, we know that greenhouse gas emissions are growing. And actually, the increases in the last 10 years, the rate of increase, is faster than the previous 30 years. The increase is largely from fossil fuels and industrial processes, as was already mentioned as well. And without additional action, we know that mean surface temperature globally will increase between 3.7 and 4.8 degrees in the next century. Others today presented that Latvia might actually have a higher increase of temperature. And we've also discussed the risks. If we live in that box, we will face increased risk of extreme weather events, increased flooding as described on some of the boards over there, potential sea level rise, and some interesting science is emerging about risks to nutrition, that food might not be as nutritious. Here, as mentioned, we have a heat wave right now, the 2003 heat wave in Europe, which was attributed to climate change or has some links to climate change potentially, resulted in more than 80,000 additional deaths across 12 countries. So we also know that if we do nothing and stick to business as usual, CO2 emissions will continue to rise, and that to stay to within 2 or 3 degrees, we need to cut emissions. So how do we do that? Well, as was mentioned already, one of the major things we need to do is scale up the use of low-carbon energy. And these two figures show, in the blue, shows what we need to do, how much we need to increase low-carbon energy to stay to 2 degrees, whereas the orange or yellow indicates the scale-up needed to stay within 3 degrees. And what are the sources of low-carbon energy? We've mentioned them today. It's solar, wind, hydropower. Other more controversial options include nuclear, carbon capture and storage. But the most important thing, as was mentioned, is to reduce our energy demand. And we can do this, for example, by using energy-efficient appliances, building buildings better. Here in Jelgava, driving in, we were pointed out that the agriculture college is being retrofitted to increase its energy efficiency. And this figure here shows the flexibility that we can gain by doing that. So the red bars are the high energy use scenario, and the blue is the lower energy use. If we use less energy, we have to rely less on potentially controversial sources of energy, such as nuclear. So we have more flexibility. So energy is good, we need to focus on that. But as was also mentioned, we need to look at the entire economy, and we need changes throughout. In this figure, you can see other sectors. Energy, electricity produces greenhouse gas emissions, but so does transport, buildings, industry. And we need to look at each of these and what we can do here, because that will influence our overall picture. So transport. What can we do in transport? Again, it was previously mentioned that we can cut emissions by reducing the emissions intensity of our cars. We can strengthen fuel efficiency measures. We could use hybrid cars. We could use electric cars. When we fly, we can invest in things like carbon credits and carbon offsets. Agriculture and forestry are important sectors in Latvia, and again, there are a range of options here. Land can be managed to capture carbon better. We can do that through things like no tillage or using biochar, which is partly burnt biomass, to try to capture carbon. Livestock can be managed so they release less greenhouse gas emissions, for example, by the use of vaccines or changing the food that we feed them. And peatland, of course, is very critical, and how we manage that is important in our greenhouse gas emissions, as are our forests. We need to try to reduce deforestation and try to prevent degradation of forests. Now, as was mentioned as well, the costs of mitigation do not need to be great, and there's increasing evidence that they might not actually impact our GDP as much as we had thought. In this figure, you can see the costs of different forms of electricity. On the bottom, you have coal, and then you can see that hydropower, wind, many of the renewables are actually as cost-effective as our traditional forms of energy supply. But we also know that we need to change our broader investment patterns. This figure shows what we need to do to move to 2 or 3 degrees warming. And our investments need to change from fossil fuels to supporting other forms of low carbon emission electricity. The good news is that there are a variety of policies that we can use to help us get there. And this figure shows the increase in climate change legislation and climate change strategy, that's on the left, around the world. And the map of the world shows the number of countries that are preparing adaptation plans. So the world is taking action. And governments and cities have a variety of tools that they can use to help them take action. We can use economic instruments, from subsidies to carbon taxes. We can use regulation. We can also use information campaigns, as was highlighted in the discussion. And the final point or one more point I'd like to mention is the importance of the benefits, the possible benefits. This slide shows the air pollution around the world, and on the left, you can see the impact of climate change policies on black carbon and sulfur dioxide. They'll likely reduce with our climate policies, and this will bring tremendous health benefits to each of us. So in the end, this is a global commons problem, that it requires international cooperation and coordination. And as was mentioned, the Baltic states will be affected by action in the United States, China, Russia, Africa. I think this makes it critical that we engage in global discussions through organizations and forums such as the IPCC or the UNFCCC. But there's also a role for each of us as private citizens. This isn't an IPCC graph, I should say. It's from the UN Environment Program, their emissions gap report, 2017. And it looks complicated, but it basically shows that government commitments in the Paris Agreement, which Alina will talk about after me, are not sufficient. And the private sector, businesses, cities, citizens, can all play a role in reducing emissions. The same report suggests that we in our daily lives focus on 6 areas that could have great impact at low cost. And they are using efficient appliances, efficient cars, planting trees or afforestation, preventing deforestation, and then looking to increase or support solar and wind energy. And
now I move back to forests. Latvia has succeeded in decreasing emissions, and forests have been important indeed. However, this is changing, as you see it here. Our land use currently is starting to release the carbon. Our ancestors felt that forests were important for our future, and we should very seriously reconsider how to continue developing our ancient values. And to conclude, let's look again into the future. We can hope that technologies will bring us solutions. Like people did that in this opera that I mentioned at the beginning.
In the opera, Neo-Arctic. But our current technology, the internet, social media, only encourages us to browse. We're walking down a corridor, looking at endless open doors, endless choices, endless options. And you can't find happiness in a hallway or a corridor. The truth is that the most radical thing we can do is to make a commitment to something, to a person, such as our children, to a place, such as forests or Jelgava, to a cause, protecting the environment and strengthening our future. The solution to climate change is in our hands. We have to commit to taking action. Thanks.
Okay, and straight forward, I would like to continue with presentation from Elina Valdroka, So she's my colleague working in the ministry and one of the very few persons that have been directly involved in the international climate change negotiations. I'm very proud that she is not only within the core of our ministries and Latvia's team for climate change negotiations, but also within the core team of the European Union negotiations team. So Alina, you have the floor, and I know you will make presentation in Latvian to make our lives easier for some more difficult, just for a change, this time language change.
Paldies, labdien!
Thank you. I will speak more about the Paris Agreement, which was mentioned already a couple of times. And I will start with the general background information, the framework that climate change is a fact, and moreover, it's the most important global risk. At the World Economic Forum since 2007 has noted climate extremes and climate change as among 5 dominant global risks affecting the world. And also, we feel climate change effect in Latvia. And, well, Anda was... we heard about this already previously. What is the Paris Agreement? It was adopted in the framework of the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, and that's an international agreement for restricting climate change. Perhaps you have heard about Kyoto Protocol, which will no longer function after 2020. And in difference to Kyoto Protocol, where the commitments were only with respect to industrial developed countries. In Paris Agreement, all parties to it have submitted the commitments. And so these commitments are called nationally determined contributions. And these have been submitted by all countries in view of their own national situation. But all these nationally determined contributions comprise some kind of measures to restrict climate change, or at least commitment to do this. Paris Agreement has a number of aims, and one of the most significant is to maintain the increase of average world temperature below 2 degrees and to strive to limit it within 1.5 degrees. Also to improve adaptation to climate change and to increase stability, and also to promote channeling of investment. And this channeling of direction of investments in connection with those principles of development with low carbon saturation, this is very important. Also, it's important when we think about climate stability. Another aim is to reach balance between GG emissions and also capturing. Paris Agreement is sustainable because it also includes a mechanism for increasing ambitions. In Katowice, we will have the so-called Tele-No dialogue, which was also called facilitative dialogue. But now we call it Tele-No dialogue as a result of which the states will assess to what extent they are on the right path to reach this long-term temperature aim of Paris Agreement, to decrease below 2 degrees, to restrict it with below 2 degrees, and to attempt to do that in 1.5. And here IPCC special report will be very important in this political phase. Then, in the Paris Agreement, we also have the global stock-taking process. It will be performed once in 5 years, starting with 2023, and it will cover implementation of all aims of Paris Agreement and also collective progress in countries. This stocktake won't look only at greenhouse gas emission, but also will look also at
other aims also, climate stability and so on. Now, I also have to mention that there's a huge support for the implementation. It entered into force less than a year after it was adopted on the 4th of November 2016. And during these days, currently, 177 parties have ratified the convention. Globally speaking, it is a very strong signal, really showing that so many countries have ratified this convention, and countries have also submitted those nationally determined contributions, their commitments. Many companies and NGOs support Paris Agreement, and you can find all this information. But in the context of the United States, after the president announced that the United States would be leaving the agreement, many states and many companies announced their determination to keep the commitments. And the coalition we are still in, it's more than 160 million persons in the United States and 50 states, and that's 6.3 trillion of GDP of the United States. And this initiative has been signed by more than 500 investors, states, companies, and so on. Now, about Latvia's commitment in the framework of Paris Agreement. Latvia has ratified it both individually and as EU member states. As I said, all countries have submitted their nationally determined contributions, and Latvia has defined its contribution and submitted it as part of EU contribution. And for EU, the EU defines the decrease at least by 40% up to 2030 compared to 1990. And this aim is identical to the conclusions made by European Council. And all member states unanimously adopted this aim or this nationally determined contribution. So Latvia has decreased these emissions at least by 6% compared to 2005. And this applies to those emissions which are not included into emission trading system.
And here you can see our goals in more detail to be topical by 2020 and 2030, according to the approved the climate and energy package of the European Union. By 2020, we were allowed plus 17% increase in GHG, not included operations, but by 2030 we have a goal set to decrease those up to 6 or down to 6%. As Zinta has already mentioned, total GHG emissions in total have decreased for 57%, but once again I would like to emphasize that the goals set forth by the European Union had and included 1995 as a baseline, and therefore we have some additional effort to be made in order to meet that goal set by the European Union. Regarding implementation of the goals set for Latvia, so that we could reach the goal set by 2030, we will need the involvement and commitment by all the sectors of the national economy of Latvia and additional measures to be taken. We have started work on the National Energy and Climate Plan within the framework of the regulation of the European Union, which is not adopted yet, but the plan will be maintained and that should be drafted with the goal to decrease the GHG emissions by 2030. The Paris Agreement parties to the Paris Agreement are invited to develop long-term energy and climate plans accordingly. What is low carbon development? That is transition to the economics causing minimum GHG emissions, as well as attracts and stores the carbon and capture. That is also compatible and can be coupled with a positive climate and environment-friendly national economy, with an example from Sweden, where that has been already implemented. Apart from that, and to conclude, I would like to brief you on the topical event this year. This year is very significant for implementation of the Paris Agreement, as at the conference of UNFCCC in Katowice, being held from the 3rd to the 14th December of this year. Delano dialogue will be held with the political phase being implemented and highlighted during the conference, and the European Commission also will publish the European Union long-term low GHG strategy according to the goals of Paris Agreement. Katowice conference is aimed at finding common grounds for temperature maintenance or maintaining goal being achieved by all the parties to Paris Agreement. European Commission will also publish a proposal according to the Paris Agreement goals. It is forecasted that the European Commission will publish such a strategy before the UNFCCC conference in Katowice. That will bring another impetus and the current state of affairs according and regarding the actions and measures taken by the European Union. Thank you very much.
Now I think we should smoothly proceed with the discussion panel, and I would like to invite Elina back, and also Zinta, please come back to us. And in addition, I would like to also invite us to join Andris Vanaks. He is the chairman of the board of Fortum Latvia. Fortum Latvia, just to explain, is the energy supplier here in Jelgava, and one of the front runners in Latvia in terms of renewable energy. I think you are supplying almost 100% renewable energy to Jelgava city, which almost exactly very concrete and scientifically valid. So thank you very much. And he's also a great activist and promoter of green technologies, green ideas. So we are very happy to have him here. And in addition, I would like to welcome back Luchka. She was presenting at the beginning, and I think she definitely has more things to say. As you could see, she cannot really be on the sidelines. We also were hoping to have Jānis Brizga today, but he has fell ill and was not able to come. So I wish him all well, and I hope that in the next event when IPCC will come to Latvia, he will definitely be here. First of all, as I didn't provide any possibility for the audience to ask questions to the speakers, yes, there is a question. Are there any more questions from the audience there? No? Then we have one there. Yes. And then we will proceed.
So I have a question to the last speaker. You mentioned that in total Latvia must cut GHG emissions for 6% with all the sectors of national economy being involved. Could you mention and list those, or is there any industry or sector that should work more on that? Thank you for your question. Yes, currently in the context of the National Energy and Climate Plan, we expect and the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Regional Development from the industry-specific ministries regarding specific measures. After that, we will be able to evaluate whether the measures proposed by the ministries will be enough, and we will start generating a model of measures to be implemented. Afterwards, we will negotiate with the ministries and discuss with the ministries particular measures which will be implemented. Of course, energy sector, transport sector, agriculture. These are the sectors we should think more of reducing GHG emissions. Thank you. If no other questions regarding presentations.
To kick off the discussion, I think we have roughly around 20 minutes for discussion. I would like to pose the first question to everybody of you, to every one of you. Well, do you think it is possible to mitigate climate change? Is it still realistic? I know it's a tough question, so therefore I'm asking it to you and not trying to answer it on my own. So is it possible to mitigate climate change?
If I need to answer that question, I would say from energy point of view, yes, because the Earth is supplied with energy from solar much more than we need annually. And if we would be able and smart and technologically smart enough, then we can have energy free, and it will be also no issue of limiting us on doing things related to energy. And actually, in the future, we will need more energy, not only because of population growth, but also because of recycling targets and circular economy issues. It will require enormous amount of energy.
Okay. So what the other things? I hope you will all respond yes, of course. Just try to explain why do you think so?
All right. Well, I gave my answer, but I will just say that if we don't act now, it will be increasingly difficult in future. So many of the emission scenarios, as was mentioned, after 2050 say that we'll be producing no carbon emissions and actually negative carbon emissions, which involve technologies that are unproven and still developing. So I think, yes, it is, but it will be increasingly difficult if we don't act now.
My opinion, it's not about technological solution. It's not about renewables. It's about the changing of economic system. Because with the linear economy, that we produce something, use it for a few days, and then we throw it away. It's like, I think 60 or 70% of the people, of the things that are produced at this moment on this planet are only used once and then thrown away. It's impossible, because it's about, as I said, I mean, the way we live now as a consumer society, this is not a solution. Even if we change for electrical cars, we have to produce electrical car. And when you produce electrical car, you already use as much as energy as it's saved later. Hydrogen, how do you produce hydrogen? You need fossil fuels to produce it. So it's not about switching the car, it's about not having a car or sharing a car. So that's, I'm sure it's not technology. It is an important part. It's like, you know, energy efficiency first and then renewables. So it's a really tough political question, not just technology. So I'm a big believer in technology, but without changing how economy works, no way, we cannot.
I think in Latvia we have to ask a question: have we done everything we can to mitigate climate change? And I think the answer is no. So there are still a lot of potential measures we could take to mitigate climate change. And I think it has to have a bit more will from society as a whole and also from the government to start and do something with climate change and mitigate it. Because I think, for instance, on energy efficiency, there are so many buildings that are energy inefficient that you can go outside in the street and look that we have so many more potential. And that's, of course, energy is not the only area where we can work on, but there are so many potential things to do. So I think there's still a chance and a way to do that. Thank you.
Okay, I think together all your answers present a perfect answer to my question why it is possible and how, both in terms of timing and also in terms of approaches that should be selected. But you also mentioned that it's not that easy, and you also said that technologies might not be the core for the solutions. I would reckon that most people think that it's all about technologies, and if we have them, then that's the solution. So how do you think how we should approach society in this respect? Because, as you said, consumer society is one of the key aspects why we are here where we are. So obviously we have to work around society, but how to start changing it without ruining the how to say, the calmness and the how to say, people's daily comfort. Yes, exactly. Thanks. So how to start? Where to start? Well,
I'll just give an example to do with food. I'm working on one of the upcoming IPCC reports on land and food security. And the issue there is often one of the issues discussed is meat consumption. Because eating meat, livestock, for example, cows, are known to release more emissions. And theoretically, we should be cutting our meat consumption. So how do we do that? Well, one option would be to price meat to reflect some of these environmental externalities. If, for example, meat was priced higher, at least here in Latvia, maybe I wouldn't eat as much beef. I might choose chicken, or I might choose another option that's slightly less, releases less carbon emissions. So there are ways, I think maybe through regulatory mechanisms or pricing, that we can encourage consumers to make appropriate choices, recognizing that obviously in parts of the world, people don't even have access to meat. So there's no global solution to that, or it has to be very nuanced locally.
Mm-hmm.
Your idea, and actually I think it's really huge work IPCC did to commit global leaders that really scientific true needs to be accepted, and found key leaders to promote this idea, and with a successful result of Paris Agreement. And in Latvia, Paris Agreement was ratified in beginning of 2017. Almost a little bit more than 1 year ago, and I think our policy makers really didn't understood what agreements they are ratifying. That's a solid target for next century, and it will interfere and impact. It has impact on mainly all aspects of economy in Latvia and every person's life, and that's almost done. Politically, there is pressure, and also Latvian policymakers will keep working on that. But the next issue is really about consumers, and consumers need to. We call in Fortum, we call it customer in the center, and that's really important. How to make to look from consumer point of view and prepare proper motivation for consumer to change. And there are we would say that a lot of policy making process need to be reviewed from consumer point of view, especially in energy and regarding emissions. That's the issue. Why customer needs to change something, and he should be motivated to do, and why customer needs to be dynamic in the market is if it's energy consumption. So we have high peak demand in the morning, so we have enormous price for that. If that would be stable, the price would be lower. And what is motivation for a customer to change the behavior and be dynamic? Why customer needs to be energy efficient? And it should be solid motivation for him to do energy efficiency. And very important issue from energy point of view, that customers to be motivated to become producers of electricity for themselves. And that's possible today already. And then, of course, circular economy is important, and the waste is important, and recycling is important. And that's again a question, and we need to look from customer perspective, how and how he's motivated to do and change habits he has already. And in our understanding, the best solution to change behavior of customers or society in certain direction, it should be smartly driven by policymakers and scientists who understand the consequences. And we think that polluter pay principle is very motivated. We don't need to provide so many subsidies so support those who are doing well already, but we need to put a pressure on those who need to change their habits. And that will be good motivation.
Okay. Do we have any comments at this moment from the floor? Is somebody willing to get engaged in the discussion? Not yet. So I wanted to ask maybe a direct question to Luchka. In your country, how far the government is, or the society is, with this transition towards low carbon and climate resilient society? And what has been until now the key for changes? Just wait a few seconds.
In Slovenia, we were on a very good path till economic crisis. So we had a special bureau, if I may say so, for climate change, very good relationship with media. But then we had this right-wing government in the time of economic crisis. They just shut down the department. So practically we don't have an institution anymore, but we have one of the highest awareness of people in Europe regarding Eurostat statistics. So people are really, they know what the problem is, but it's not enough, because this is just knowing the problem without political participation of the people, you get nowhere. So they should be more organized. They should actually, I think in Slovenia, like in many transition countries with economy in transition, we still think that now we got the democracy, and now the democracy is a nice girl and she will do all the work for us. We don't understand that democracy means engagement, constant pressure to the politicians and decisions and so on. So we are not on the good path there. But regarding households, we see enormous number of self-sufficient homes with electricity. They gather water, so, and they all have the motive not just to be kind to environment, but actually to earn money in long term. So it's investment that pays off maybe, at least I guess, in 5-10 years. So they see like having the electrical installation on the roof and exchanging the electricity with the network. So, but otherwise, I think we did not speak much today about the role of the media, because we talk about governments, about the people, but who is in between? Who brings information into house? Not school necessarily. Television, radio, every day, every minute, not to mention internet and Twitter and so on. So I think for effective changing of the generation who will not go to school anymore, we need a media policy. I don't know who is responsible for that, either maybe government or Ministry for Environment or people. Otherwise, we are losing precious, precious time. So media is important, especially in the small countries when you have local media which is more trusted maybe. I know in Slovenia is a case like that. And we don't tackle that enough.
Thank you very much. And yes, maybe a bit coming closer to the negotiations on the solutions that are taking place all around the world, and mostly and hopefully mostly for the sake of the climate change. I know from the perspective of governments that governments, in order to make a decision regarding action, are concerned about two things. Firstly, they are concerned what their constituencies will say, and they are afraid that if they make very strong decisions regarding big changes, that voters will not like it. People will not like it. Households will hate the government and fire them. That's one thing that government is usually afraid of. The other thing is that they always are looking at other governments. And of course, there is a valid point there. If other governments are not moving and not doing anything, but we are sort of creating more restrictions, more stringency for our companies and citizens, and we might lose the competitive edge with regard to other governments. And this is the other side. So I don't know, Elina, how does it feel in international negotiations? Are we moving somewhere regarding this issue? You said that many countries have ratified the Paris Agreement, but that's not the only criteria we should be judging about, and others just feel free to hop in on this question, because this is very serious. You all said that governments have to act, but for governments, there are certain conditions upon which they act, and there's chicken and egg sort of problem.
Thank you. I think I have to talk about the experience I had in the last UNFCCC Climate Change Conference in May in Bonn this year. We had the technical phase of the Talanoa dialogue, where governments in smaller settings sat together. I participated on behalf of Latvia, and we were discussing and presenting the solutions. For instance, we answered the question, where are we now, where do we want to go, and how do we get there? And countries were talking about practical solutions they are implementing in their countries, and they were showcasing what they're doing. So in my room, it felt like everyone is doing something. Some countries are more advanced, some are less advanced, but everyone is doing something. It was especially very interesting to hear how, for instance, small islands are increasing their adaptation measures, how, for instance, Marshall Islands, they have set themselves an economy-wide emission reduction objective for a small island. It's very challenging, and it's very inspiring to see how they are doing. But I think there's still it's within the country's submitted NDCs, and which also Zinta showed in the UNEP slide, that the current promises, they are not sufficient. So also the current actions are, of course, not sufficient with regards to the Paris Agreement long-term temperature goal, but at least something is happening, and there are some examples, and I think you can read the practical examples in the summary report. I think the UNFCCC Secretariat will publish somewhere soon. Yeah, thank you.
Just to say that it is obviously politically potentially a difficult decision to move forward, and when others might not be. But I think it's evident through the Paris Agreement, through all the data, that climate change is here to stay, and therefore we have to act. And it's just a matter of when. And there are benefits to a government acting early, to investing, to taking the lead. For example, we can look at our neighbor Estonia and how they're now leading the world in the IT sector, and that was because the government said, this is our priority, we're going to invest and be world leaders. So I think any government that says, we're going to make climate change a priority, we're going to become a world leader, can reap benefits. And examples of innovation in the area are Fiji just released a climate bond, so you can get investors to come and to invest in your country if you are some of these early movers and actors.
Europe actually is afraid today because they are not anymore leaders in renewable, and China is taking over, and it's developing economy, and that's a good motivation to develop and change all economy to low carbon. And in Latvia, we all policymakers today, it's calculated only cost impact, what households and society is paying for renewable energy. Nevertheless, no any positive impact is calculated to mathematically to evaluate these positive impacts, and those positive impacts are huge. The investments in economy, the workplaces during construction materials during construction, it was all local. There have been lower cost for heating because of CHP supports. There are people working in maintenance and operation of these plants. We are not consuming gas, so it's exported product, so we have more positive trade balance on the country. And decentralized production of electricity is reducing losses in transmission networks. So all those things, those are positive things, and those have certain value, but those are not evaluated accordingly. If you smart enough and you can calculate and get understanding that it's actually benefiting economy and also society on GDP level, that's a good motivation to continue. And assessments available from European Commission regarding more ambitious targets are showing that more ambitious target is more better it is for GDP of all Europe. And it's economic issues only, but if we calculate the damages and of climate and infrastructures pricing, that's enormous and much more impact for future. And if we price it in, so we see it's cheaper to go low carbon.
My opinion about why the negotiations are so slowly progressing is because they are actually still, they are talking about territorial emissions. And this is not fair, because just today, Link has sent me an article, China emissions will go up. For whom are Chinese producing things? For us. So we just said, well, this is emission of China, but I wear Chinese shoes, my computer is made in China. So as far as we will just talk about territorial emissions and ignore consumption emissions, it's not fair, it's not ethical. So I think the carbon tax approach would be the only approach that would speed up negotiations and bring some, not ethical, at least more just solution. Because if I would be Chinese producer, I would go against the negotiation, you know. So, but nobody really wants to hear, even in Paris Agreement, there's no mentioning of carbon tax or consumption emissions. So we are lying to ourselves in a way. And Europe is so green. Why is so green lately? Because China is so polluted. So that's why European air is clean, not because we changed so much. And this is what I actually resent politicians. And maybe one more, when I'm getting angry, I'm really getting angry about politicians. One of the problems also is, look at the world. Who is leading the world? If there are white men with a gray hair, people here excluded, over 70, how can you expect them to care about climate change? No, young politicians, we need young people to enter into politics, I guess, as well as carbon tax.
Yes, you like Mr. Macron. to be a leader.
Yes.
Particularly, but at least regarding climate change, he has some strong points.
But the comment regarding territorial emissions and consumption emissions is very valid point. Also regarding Latvia, we have lowest emissions per capita in the EU, but that's only because we are not producing much in Latvia. Let's be frank. It's just because of that. We don't produce cars, we don't produce technologies, almost none. We hardly produce some clothes and some other products. So yeah, it's just because of that. And there are some estimations regarding how large would be our carbon footprint if we would count in all the imports. And that's at least twice as high, and then we are at the same level as the rest of so-called polluting old countries in Europe. Unfortunately, we have to close our discussion, but in order to provide opportunity to all of you to say some final words, I have one final tough question for today. Yes, Elina was talking about government's contributions towards Paris agreements. Zinta mentioned that it is important to make commitments in order to have some actions. So I wanted to ask you very personally, have you made your commitments? Have you changed something in your life? Do you change something, do differently? What is your contributions towards climate change mitigation? And if there are maybe some contributions, commitments in mind that you would be able to take up in future. So please go ahead. And I hope you will inspire others and not get others more gloomy.
Well, my household, it's never about one person. It's about people who share the refrigerator in a car, so it's household. Well, we started in a funny way. We stopped wasting food because we realized, that a lot of food just went away. Even I never finished a bottle of beer. I always drink half because bottles are big. So I just, you pour it into the sink. So that was the first. So we actually go to the shop not when we are hungry, not when they are advertising buy 3 for 2. Or things like that. So it's carefully planned process. How much food and how when. And it's very time consuming. But then it comes a routine. So this was the first step. And in my estimation, these emissions already represented about 20% of personal emissions, just food. Then we switched the car from fuel to the gas. So we are still having a fossil car. And it's also very cheap, so it was double motivation. So you had to motivate your husband as well, not just for the climate change sake. So these were 2 important steps. The third one was hard to decide because, flying, also if it's IPCC meetings and important meetings in career, I do it less. I do it really when it's for a few days and more presentations, so I never fly to 1 day or half a day event. So this is personal. It's not always easy because video conferences, they're never the same. And what is planned? What is planned is maybe, but it's still a bit problem with the location of our house. We will go to have a solar power plant, not just the station. But you need some time and also some money. It's not for free. This is the next step. Not so much, but in terms of carbon, it's a lot. And maybe a contribution as a professor I made, it's not so much personal, but it's made by me. So I really encourage students to know what they are doing. So I try to transfer this to young people practically every day, because it doesn't matter what you teach. There's always the opportunity to show a good example, a good practice, sometimes in a funny way, sometimes in not like preaching, but more like sharing experiences.
So I think for me personally, I have when I when I have to buy a new electrical appliance, now I really check the standards there are about the efficiency of that electrical appliance. So that's one thing. The second thing is, since I've become involved in the climate negotiations, you always go to international meetings where you have to eat lunch with people. And most of the people in international negotiations are vegetarians. So in a way, you've become more aware of the meat consumption and effect of the carbon footprint on the way you consume meat. I still eat meat, but I eat it less, especially during the climate change conferences where people are really aware, and also it's a good peer pressure as well there. And the third thing is that I have a personal car, which I try to use less, especially when I have to go somewhere by myself. Then I try to use, for instance, the train. So that's very practical and very small steps. Thank you.
Just to build on the food, I wanted to add that in the lead up to the Paris negotiations, the Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, held a lunch for heads of state. So the head of South Africa was there, Angela Merkel was there, I think Obama was there. And what he served was recycled food. So it was leftover food products. So the ends of pickles and juice from cans of beans, and had been repurposed into a burger, a vegetable burger. And I have a photo, so if anybody wants to see, all the world government heads were shown that you can eat in a better way, and that's something that we can. I also try to cut meat, so yeah.
There are some things we can influence in family, and we try to be active. Now our main issue is sorting of the waste and biodegradable parts separately, paper, plastic, glass. I have 5 kids in a family, and we are looking very precisely now on packaging marking. What does it mean, or where we can put it? Is it possible to recycle or not? That we that's I as a consumer, I can influence and I can do it. However, I need to go to work. I need to go by car, and I don't have an option actually on that. If that would be possible, and that I cannot do myself alone, and that other stakeholders need to be involved in that.
Thank you very much. This is really very inspiring. Just maybe to add from my side, just to let you know that I'm also doing something. Some of the things that Aza mentioned, but what was not mentioned about transportation and mobility. I am using car in my daily life because I have very, very bad public transport connection, and I'm afraid actually to drive on a bicycle because there's no bicycle road, and I'm too scared of other cars to ride a bicycle. But what I'm doing, I'm rather frequently forcing my family to share a car with others. They have now already got used to this habit, but at the beginning they were very surprised why I'm so much trying to coordinate when everybody is moving somewhere and going somewhere, and why shouldn't I go separately on the car because it's easier. But now they are more sort of used to this tendency, and I think this is really very, very valid and important for Latvia, as yes, we don't always have to buy new cars, especially if we don't have money for that. Sometimes it's about choosing the most efficient ways for transportation. And yes, in cases where it is possible not to move at all, like attending via video conferences, that's perfect. But if that's not possible, if there's no public transportation, it is very simple actually to gather larger crowd and drive together. It's easy and it's a lot of fun. So I hope today when you go home, you will have a company if you are driving a car. If you are walking, then enjoy the nice weather and be strong. We're gonna have a few more other these hot days in future as well. So that's true. Okay, I would like to wrap up today's conversation. Let's give a big round of applause for the panel. I hope you all got answers to the questions that you had in mind, and you are now more aware about the scale, about the complexity of the issue. Unfortunately, it's not easy. It's very complicated, and that's the key problem here. And anyway, I hope this also inspired you for some good works in future. And if you have any questions, any suggestions, especially if you have any suggestions what we should tell to parliamentarians and municipalities, just let us know, because tomorrow we are meeting them. So we will try to pass the message of climate change also to our national parliament, Saima, and also to all the municipalities. And I reckon that's going to be a tough job. You have a suggestion?
Suggestion? Yeah, sure. Renewable energy is our business in Fortum, and we are welcoming others to organize a strong competition in that field, and this competition really will be the most efficient way how to implement cost-effective solutions.
Okay, thank you for that. So, thank you very much. Let's all applaud ourselves. I think you were wonderful public.